Okay, let's dive right into this explainer because today we're going to completely rethink everything we thought we knew about focus, dopamine, and study drugs. We constantly hear about motivation when people talk about hacking our productivity, but today we're actually going to look under the hood at the real neurological architecture of why we do what we do. So, do study drugs actually make you smarter? It's a question that naturally comes up all the time, especially in those highly competitive academic and professional environments. A lot of students and professionals are out there taking medications like methylphenidate, which you probably know better as Ritalin, off-label. And they're doing this hoping to, artificially enhance their cognitive abilities and just magically find the focus they need to tackle really difficult, draining tasks. But here is the truly fascinating realization, and it's perfectly captured in his quote from Dr. Michael Frank, who co-led an NIH-funded study. He says, "These drugs do not actually boost your cognitive ability at all." Think about that. They don't make you inherently smarter, and they don't make you more capable of solving a complex math problem. So what exactly are they doing in our brains? To answer that, here's our agenda for today. 1. The focus illusion. 2. The cost-benefit calculator. 3. How Ritalin actually works. 4. Extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And finally, 5. Dopamine and your personality. Let's jump right into section 1, the focus illusion and the myth of the smart pill. We really need to dismantle this popular myth once and for all. ADHD medications like methylphenidate actually work by manipulating dopamine. Now, dopamine is this absolutely vital chemical messenger in your brain, and it's deeply involved in things like reward seeking, movement, and motivation. What this drug does is essentially block the reabsorption of dopamine by the brain's neurons. It traps more of it inside a very specific part of your brain called the striatum. But here's the catch. Having all this extra dopamine just floating around, it doesn't magically increase your IQ.
Moving right along to section 2, the cost-benefit calculator, or your brain's accountant. To really get this, we actually need to completely stop thinking of dopamine purely as a pleasure chemical. Instead, I want you to view it as a highly analytical financial accountant living inside your head. This is exactly what dopamine does in the brain's striatum. Every single time you face a task, your brain weighs the mental effort required, that's the cost, against the potential payout or reward, the benefit. Dopamine is literally the chemical that influences how that scale tips. Let's look at section 3, how Ritalin actually works and how it hacks the calculator.
So if dopamine is the accountant, how do these study drugs manipulate the math? Well, let's look at a pretty amazing experiment from the National Institute of Mental Health. Researchers gathered 50 participants and offered them a series of memory tasks. The rule was simple. The harder the mental task, the more money they were offered. The researchers meticulously measured the natural dopamine levels in the participants' striatum, gave them either a placebo or a dopamine-altering drug like methylphenidate, and then, and this is the brilliant part, they tracked exactly where the participants looked on a screen while making their choices.
The baseline data they found is wild. They noticed that people with naturally lower dopamine levels were highly sensitive to the perceived cost. Basically, they looked at the difficulty of the task and immediately thought, nope, that's way too hard. But the folks with naturally higher dopamine levels, they overwhelmingly focused their attention on the benefits. They were looking straight at the cash reward.
And here's the absolute kicker, the real secret revealed by the eye-tracking data when the drugs were introduced. Ritalin didn't stop people from looking at how hard the task was. They still saw the cost. But the artificial surge of dopamine increased the weight they gave to the benefits. Suddenly, the reward just felt so much heavier in their mental calculator. It completely elevated their cognitive motivation without actually altering their baseline ability one single bit.
That brings us to section 4, extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, and natural dopamine hits. So what if we don't want to rely on artificial pharmacology? How does our brain generate these dopamine hits naturally? To answer that, we have to bridge psychology and neuroscience. We're going to turn to an incredible academic thesis from the University of Skövde that maps behavioral psychology, specifically something called self-determination theory, directly onto our brain chemistry. This literally allows us to view behavioral psychology right through the lens of neuroscience. Self-determination theory distinguishes between two very different drives. First, you have extrinsic motivation. That's doing something for an external incentive, like the cash in that NIH study, or getting a good grade in school. But the crucial point we need to focus on is intrinsic motivation.
This is the inherent satisfaction and pleasure of simply engaging in an activity for its own sake. It's doing something purely out of joy and curiosity. Think of a child spontaneously playing. They require absolutely zero external motivation to do that.
And this highlights a really strange, kind of counterintuitive quirk in human psychology called the undermining effect. Behavioral studies using the free choice paradigm show that if you take someone who is intrinsically motivated, let's say they're just having fun putting together a puzzle, and you start paying them to do it, their natural intrinsic motivation actually drops. No way, right? But it's true. Once the external reward is removed, they will literally spend less free time on the puzzle than they did before. External bribes can actually overwrite our natural, curiosity-driven dopamine systems. Let's zoom out even further for Section 5, Dopamine and Your Personality, taking the macro view.
So how does this chemical quirk shape who we actually are? Well, in personality science, the gold standard is the 5-factor model. Researchers group these 5 traits into 2 higher-order meta-traits. You have stability, which relies heavily on serotonin, and then you have plasticity, which is fueled by our good friend, dopamine. Trait plasticity is driven by the specific traits of extroversion and openness. It basically defines individuals who have a strong, stable proneness to exploration. These are the people who naturally seek out personal growth, they're always generating novel ideas, and they are deeply engaged in exploring the unknown.
And right here is where the micro and the macro just perfectly align. On one hand, we have intrinsic motivation, which is this temporary state of flow you get just for the joy of it. On the other hand, we have trait plasticity, which is a stable, lifelong personality orientation toward exploration. And the beautiful thing? Both of these share the exact same neural engine, your dopamine system. It's all connected. From an evolutionary perspective, this actually makes perfect sense. This natural dopamine drive is exactly what encourages play and exploration in mammals. It's literally the reason we humans have the energy to learn new technologies, adopt to wildly uncertain environments, and develop brand new survival skills without needing someone to, stand there and hand us a dollar bill for doing it. Dopamine isn't just about pushing through a really hard study session, it is the absolute chemical engine of human adaptation.
So what does this all mean for us? Well, the next time you're struggling to focus on a task, I want you to ask yourself this final question. Are you trying to artificially force the dopamine of an external reward? Or can you tap into the natural plasticity of your own curiosity? Honestly, understanding your brain's hidden calculator might just be the most powerful motivation tool you have. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep exploring.